All right, everybody. Hi, welcome to our next week of class. Happy to have George Santos Garcia with me today. Our conversation, I think, is going to build very nicely on the conversation last week with Professor Orlando Alvarez, because last week, one of the things that he talked about in particular was using mindfulness as a way to create a little space between ourselves and our thoughts, to understand that our thoughts are not necessarily reality and our thoughts are not us. So George and I are going to be talking a lot today about building on that in terms of how we look at our thoughts and what else can we do when we realize that maybe that thought doesn't represent reality. But before we transition into all that, let me give you a little better introduction of George. So George is a student in our PsyD program here at the Mount. That's the Doctorate of Psychology. He will eventually be a licensed clinical psychologist. He is currently interning at the Department of Mental Health, Antelope Valley Child and Adolescent Program. I should also share that George and I teach together. So this is a colleague of mine, although because he knew me as his professor at one point, you may hear him call me Doc in our conversation. That's his shortened version of Dr. Robin. George, thank you so much for being with us today.
It's my pleasure to be here with you, Dr. Robin, and my pleasure to virtually be meeting all of you.
So yeah, we can roll right into this. I invited George specifically because this has become a kind of a favorite topic of his after it actually being a topic earlier that he was maybe a little resistant to. So feel free to talk about that today or anything else that
Yeah.
comes up. But like I said, we're really talking this week about what do we do as we examine our thoughts. I know I personally have all kinds of irrational thoughts all the time that can just absolutely spin. They can drive me crazy. And I can get so caught up with that thing, it's off. My thoughts are often telling me that I don't belong here, that I'm not smart, that I've bothered people, that I've messed up, all kinds of interesting um, sort of predictions of the future or interpretations of what's happening around me right now. And yeah, so what I think we want to bring today is what do we do? Because I think that happens to all of us, and a lot of us think we're alone when our thoughts are spinning this way. So yeah, thanks for talking with us today. And I'll ask you right off the gate, sort of, does that kind of thing happen to you too?
Oh, no, absolutely. And it's something that's a universal human experience. And I think it's so important to actually acknowledge it out loud, to actually share that it's happening. I feel like when we have these irrational thoughts, it often can feel super isolating and like it's only you and like, oh my God, why am I having this stupid thought? And it can lead to a lot of like negative feelings you turn into onto yourself, which as we're going to talk about, right, like feelings, your thoughts and your behaviors, they're all connected together. And so you feel alone, you feel isolated. So now you have these thoughts that are giving you all these negative feelings. They're just going to make those thoughts even worse, going to make your behaviors worse, and it just all keeps kind of like feeding into each other.
Yeah.
And like
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no, no, no. Like this is like Dr. Robin alluded, in the therapy world, right? We call this cognitive behavioral theories or cognitive behavioral therapy. And it's something that I kind of used to be like, oh my God, there's so much more into it than just your thoughts, your feelings, and your emotions, all these other things you want to dive into. But it is an incredible thing that is like a universal human experience, right? No matter where you're coming from, you're going to have this interaction within you. It may show up differently, but we're all experiencing. And it's so powerful when you learn to recognize it and you learn what you can do to change it so that you know that those negative thoughts don't control you. You actually have the power within you to change them.
Yeah, I want to touch on one thing you were saying because I alluded to the fact that you were a little skeptical of this, and then you started to mention there's so much more that you can dive into. So just to give my students a little more context about that, right? There's lots of different theories about how we do counseling or how people can engage in their own personal growth work. And some of those theories go more into things like our childhoods and the traumas that we experienced. What are the things that happened to me when I was a kid that I've really internalized and how they show up for me? And the idea of really going back and visiting that. And I'm actually a proponent of that. I've worked a lot on young Robbie. I was Robbie as a kid, and I've done a lot of work with little Robbie, and I still do. But to your point, George, wherever that shows up, like whatever that trauma was, I also have the ability to look at how it shows up for me today. Like, I know my mom used to kind of snap and yell at me a lot, and I worried a lot as a child about like how to not mess up and make her angry. One way that still shows up for me today is that I'm very quick to go, oops, I messed up. Oh no, I must have done this wrong. Somebody's going to be upset. Everything's going to fall apart. And yes, I can work on what happened to me as a child, and I can keep thinking about that and diving deep in that. And I have the ability right in the moment as I'm observing a thought to say, this thought might not be reality. This thing that I'm predicting that I think is about to go wrong, or me thinking that I know what's happening in that person's mind and what they're saying about me right now, they might not really be saying that. So that ability in that moment, and again, this is really what connects to last week and mindfulness, but like in that moment to stop and recognize it, there's a thought, observe that thought separately from me, and then what might I want to do with it? And this is where we come from this theory, right? What might I want to do with that?
And both I'm a big proponent of both aspects of like this theoretical way of looking at feelings, emotions, and your experience and how it shows up in like the therapy room. But a lot of times, if we can't get our body and mind in the same place, we can't even start diving into the deeper work. We can't get to little Robbie if every time we bring up mom snapping, it brings up a thought of that moment, which then makes your heart start racing because your brain will give you a feeling before you realize you have a feeling. It's going to start sending out all of these hormones, and you're going to start heart's racing, you're getting sweaty, you're anxious all of a sudden. And now because you're anxious, you're acting in a certain way. And it's all connected. It's all this interplay. And when you see it happening and you can recognize, wait a minute, where can I pause? Where can I interject? Where can I put my stop sign? See what's happening. And you immediately start, well, I shouldn't say immediately, but you start seeing that difference that it makes in that particular moment. But it's also beautiful too because I think it can work for longer term things, right? Uh, we do a lot of CBT when it comes to dealing with things that come from like depression, anxiety, and it doesn't have to be just like a psychological illness. It can just be dealing with those negative feelings and emotions and behaviors we interact with day to day.
Yeah, so you mentioned it again, CBT, and just for the students again, we'll say that's cognitive behavioral therapy. And even though therapy is in there, we can do that
Yeah.
cognitive and behavioral part on our own. So, like you're saying, one of it is what's the behavioral part? If my body's
Hmm.
all cut up, maybe right now there's a behavior I can engage in to shift how I feel, which again really ties back to our conversation last week with Orlando, too, right? Maybe I need to go for a run or a walk or what are, let me stay there for a minute. I'll stay on behaviors before we spend most of our conversation talking about thoughts. But for you, can I ask you, like, what are some of the behaviors that you use to shift when you recognize that that kind of spiral is happening?
I'll actually start it from kind of like the negative behaviors, right? And how they impact. We This notion of like, oh my God, I've been laying in bed all day. I haven't gotten up. I haven't done the homework I need to do for class. I haven't done the readings I've done for class. Oh my God, I slept through my appointment. And then that that those thoughts that come there while you're laying in bed, right, are now kind of like building this connection. You're in bed, you're bathing yourself in these negative thoughts,
And
and now your
shaming,
brain
basically,
starts.
right? You're already
Yes,
shaming
shame is a
yourself for
huge
what you haven't
component.
done.
And you're now is your that feeling, that emotion of shame is kicking in, and your brain starts flooding your body. So it starts reinforcing that shame when you physically feel it in your body. I think a big part of this too is I'm sure you guys probably covered it last week with the mindfulness, but being in tune with what your body is saying and the signals it's sending you, because sometimes our body knows before our brain has put the thought together. They all just are constantly talking and interacting. But if you think about like these how behaviors, thoughts and feelings are connected, when I'm there sitting in bed just shaming myself, if I can manage to turn up my stop sign and pause the thinking, because sometimes the easiest target is the thinking. You can't always change how you feel immediately. You can't change the behavior you're doing, but you can tackle that thought. And if I take a moment and I'm just like, oh, you know what? I can email the appointment I canceled and reschedule. You know what? I still have time later today and tomorrow to do my reading, right? It's like kind of like that perspective. It then starts shifting the feelings. Now, sometimes I feel like you have to add a behavioral component, you have to add an action. Sometimes you might correct the thought and you might acknowledge that this shame that I'm thinking about isn't correct, that maybe I'm overthinking it, maybe I'm overburdening myself, but the feeling is still there. You still feel it. And something that I've learned in my education and in my work is that when you take actions, physical actions, it can help fight back that feeling. Go for a walk at your favorite park. Go turn on your favorite music, your favorite TV show, anything that can bring pleasure, right? Get that brain to start giving you all those happy neurochemicals. And we notice that when you do that, that feeling goes away. And when that feeling starts to go away, that thought becomes less locked in, right? That thought is now easier to let it go. And you can move forward. And again, like Dr. Robbins stated at the beginning, all humans go through this. We all experience this. And a lot of us are probably engaging in some of these techniques without even realizing it.
Yeah.
This might be something that you might already be doing in your day-to-day life, but recognizing those connections and where you can throw a stop sign and where you can throw a go sign and start moving so that you affect the others.
I
And
love that phrase, throw a stop sign. I'm going to hold on to that, right? And I like that point too, that a lot of us are already doing these things. This is a way to become even more intentional about doing those things. I probably do it from time to time and it probably works. Here's a chance to become even more aware. Hey, I could do that thing right now that works for me. So you mentioned when you're in that shame cycle, say, where you're not doing enough and you're shaming about it, which means you're likely to just lay there and still not do anything.
Mhm.
You might get up and go for a walk, or you might turn on music. Something I've noticed, if we stay with behaviors for a minute, I might actually get up and do one little tiny thing that counts as an achievement and then give myself credit for it. Maybe I just handled one email, or I need to take the trash out, so I took it out. And typically I want that like, well, that's nothing, that doesn't count. But I'm going to go, you know what? I just took the trash out. That was something, check. I just did that. I just did that. I've
Yeah,
really moved into do something little and concrete and then go, hey, I just did that. And that can shift me gradually in that direction. So as we both talk about what we do behaviorally, right, that goes back to that triangle you mentioned at the beginning, and we'll make sure that's one of the things we post this week on our board, is that triangle of actions, thoughts, and feelings. So we can intervene at the level of actions or behaviors.
I'm sorry, 1 second, Dr. Robin.
Sure. And as George is checking in with somebody in his room, I will continue with that. uh, I'll continue with that on my side. So the other part of that I really want to drive home for us is that, on the other hand, I can intervene at the level of thoughts, right? So actions or behaviors, thoughts and feelings. We tend to feel stuck in a feeling. We can intervene at the level of behaviors. I could say, what could I do differently right now that's going to shift how I feel? And that's where this really builds on last week. Or I could say, what am I thinking right now? And how can I shift that thought? And so that's really, I think, where we're going to focus the rest of this conversation is, how do I shift a thought that I'm having? If I think about what Orlando said last week, sometimes I'm going to notice it and I'm going to acknowledge to myself that that thought is not me. That thought is not necessarily reality. But now what do I do with it? So where do I go from there? So a big part of this theory is reframing, or a way that I like to think of it is like, what is the story I'm telling myself right now? And is there a different story that I could be telling? What just happened that prompted me to feel this way? But also, what did I just say to myself about what happened? And how did what I said to myself about it, the interpretations I made, the story I told myself, the assumptions or the negative predictions, how is that actually creating a feeling? If I'm predicting something negative, it's going to make me feel anxious. If I'm assuming something bad about what that person just thought of me, then it's going to make me kind of sad or down. But a lot of times there's no evidence for any of that. It's not really based in reality. And we lean very quickly into the negative. We do that very automatically, right, George?
Oh, it's absolutely, it happens without you even thinking about it. It sometimes there's great science, and sometimes you literally think before you realize you thought, and get our feelings happen before we've even had a moment to think about it. And going back to like the point that a lot of us do this already. Think about how many times you've done a pros and cons list, right? You sit down, you can't make a decision, and you make a list trying to decide what's good or bad. You can do the same thing with these thoughts. What evidence do I have for it? What evidence do I not have for it? When you write something down and you put it in front of you, it can make it real, it can make it concrete, and it makes it hit different. It just makes it bring the reality of the situation home, and it can help change those feelings and those thoughts.
I'm curious to ask you, what is an example of an automatic thought? I know another word that gets used sometimes is cognitive distortions. That sounds like a kind of a judgy term, but it's ways we automatically as humans sort of distort reality, and we tend to distort it in particular to the negative. I know I engage in a lot of these all the time, and I'll share some of those too. I'm curious, like, what is one or more of yours that you catch?
One of my biggest cognitive distortions is assuming because somebody doesn't reply to me via text like this, it's
Mhm.
because they don't like me, they're mad at me. I have done something to upset this individual. And God forbid they leave me on red and I can see that they saw my text message, right? The spiral happens. And I have to take a minute and, you know, you use that like rational thinking moment, like stop. I feel like I made them mad. I feel like they're ignoring me, but could it be that they're busy in the middle of something, right? And you kind of, I start talking to myself about it. And then I also start thinking about how many times have I opened up a text message and forgot to reply, or think I replied and didn't, and I get back to it a few hours later, right? And finding that evidence to do it, that evidence that proves that the way you're thinking is not quite right, right? And again, doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It doesn't mean that your brain's broken. It doesn't mean you have a mental illness because you're having errors and cognitive distortions. We
Means
all
you're
have
doing
them.
what everyone else does.
You're
Every
being
single person in the universe does this.
you're being a
Yeah.
complete human being in the process of it. And it's a universal experience. And I do always urge folks to like share and talk about these things out loud because it normalizes them. It makes it so that we all know we're going through it. Um, and it's just part of being human.
Yeah. When you mentioned the leaving on red, which of course always gets me too, even though I'm a super busy person, I leave people without answering them
Mhm.
all the time. But somehow that seems different, right? That's making me think about something that just happened to me yesterday. I had a student who is in two different classes with me. I really like him a lot. He brings a lot to the conversation. I'm also his advisor. He emailed me and said, "Can you release my hold? I need to make a change in my schedule." And I immediately went, "Oh, he's dropping my class. I guess he doesn't like the class. Wait, what have I done wrong in there? Did I really have a bad first couple of weeks?" And I caught myself feeling really down. It was like, oh, I feel really low now. Why do I feel so low? Oh, I'm telling myself that I taught a lousy class, and then I caught it like, okay, well, what else could be going on? Maybe that's not even what he's going to change in his schedule. A, maybe he's changing something else. B, even if he does change it, there could be so many different reasons. He could have a conflict at work. He could have something going on in his personal life. And then I even went, okay, C, like, what if he's dropping my class because he doesn't like it? I'd be bummed about that because he adds a lot to the conversation. I'd be disappointed if he wasn't in my class anymore. Would it be the end of the world? No, I'd still be okay. So I have to check all the levels of the logic of what I just said to myself.
And Dr. Arvin, what you're talking about in the therapy room, deal with it. We call it like talking out to the worst possible outcome, right? So in the example you're giving, or like the example I give about the text message, so what if they're mad at me? What does that mean? And as you start like laying out what that means, it can kind of take some of the stress out because now it's less of a bit of a guessing game. You kind of have an idea of what the worst possible scenario. And
Yeah, and what
usually,
if that was like if I stay with what you said? So what if they're mad at me? Well, that would be unpleasant or uneasy.
mhm,
I also have the skills to talk with someone, to hear them about what they're feeling. I've had disagreements with other partners and friends, and we know how to work it out. So if that like 1% chance that they're actually not happy with me, what that means is we would talk through it and work it out. So
exactly.
you go,
And sometimes
even then,
that talking it up to the worst possible end is a little daunting because now you got to kind of be careful, right? Because then you might even get more stressed out about thinking about the possible worst outcome. Something that I love to do is talking it out to the most ridiculous outcome, like. In your situation, Dr. Robin, like, oh my God, does this mean I'm teaching a horrible class? Oh well, now I'm gonna get fired, I'm gonna lose my teaching job, I'm gonna end up being like destitute out in the, and you just kind of like just explode it out, and it
uh,
just becomes so ridiculous that it takes away those feelings and makes that, somehow making it more ridiculous makes the thought more manageable.
you can stop and laugh at yourself. At
Yes,
some
yes,
point, you start to get some perspective about how silly the whole thing is.
exactly.
I love that. That's a great technique. Um, I'm thinking, let's see, as we talk about some of these distortions that show up for a lot of us, and there are entire lists of these, and I'll post a list of these for the students too, but maybe you and I could also think of a couple of the ones that show up for us a lot.
And
Catastrophizing,
I
I think. We're talking right now about what
yeah,
they call catastrophizing, which is imagining the worst thing that could possibly happen. And I definitely have a tendency to do that. Well, maybe this is wrong, and then it's going to lead to that, and it's going to lead to that. And I've talked with this one a lot about students, like my undergrad students. Maybe you don't get the grade that you wanted on a test. It's very easy to go, oh man, I'm going to fail out of this class and I'm going to fail out of college. And you picture a whole series getting worse and worse and worse versus I can replace that with like, well, that's a little disappointing. What am I going to do next? Well, I'm going to study a little differently for the next one. I'm going to check in with
mhm.
my professor and probably get a better grade next time. And, but
I,
catastrophizing, I think, is a common one. We picture a catastrophe.
I think other ones that are really common that sometimes go hand in hand is like a mind reading or thinking things are because of you when they're more than likely not, right? An example that I always used to love to use is one of my favorite professors will walk with headphones on, and sometimes you wave at them and they don't notice you and they keep walking. Oh my God, they don't like me, they're mad at me, they don't want to talk to me, they don't want to deal with me. So now I'm putting meaning to their actions. I'm trying to read their mind as to why they didn't acknowledge me or see me. Or it could just be they're really into their phone, they're really into their headphones. I do that. I walk around with my headphones on, looking at my phone and don't notice the world around me. But it's so easy to ascribe and give yourself the responsibility for that other person's action and to think that you can tell what they're thinking, right? It's the you get caught off in traffic and they're doing it on purpose to piss me off. It's like, no, it's probably just somebody in a hurry trying to get somewhere that was just rude and cut you off. And acknowledging when we give somebody else behavior when we make it like it's because of us, and
Mhm.
realizing and taking the moment again, like throwing that stop sign and going like, is it because of me though? That it is, or could it be, is there a more realistic or reasonable explanation as to their behavior?
So again, I can go, what story am I telling myself right now? I'm telling myself the
Mhm.
story that it's all about me and that person doesn't like me. What's another story? That person puts headphones on because they're busy all day long and they give a lot of energy to lots of people, and that's a space where they put a boundary in. Maybe they're in between a class and a meeting, so they've created a little bit of mental space before they go turn on for the next responsibility they have. Huh, that would make sense. Hmm. I
and
Go ahead, sorry.
yeah, I was going to say, Dr. Robin, as we're like kind of rounding this out, I just want to really just emphasize, I cannot emphasize enough, we all do this. We
Yes.
all do this. This is doesn't mean you are, I mean, therapy is great for everyone. So go to therapy if you think you need therapy, but it doesn't mean that you're broken. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with your brain, with your feelings. It's a a normal part of being a human, especially in a world where we are bombarded by so much stimulus constantly, right? The between social media, the realities where we're just constantly bombarded with stimulus, and it's so easy to just get lost in the reactions that that causes to our body.
Yeah. And the other point I would add as we round it out is that it's not a switch that we flip. It's not like I learned this technique and now I know how to just make that thought go away. The patterns keep showing up for us. They've been around for a while. I think of those kind of like the little voices on your shoulder that try to tell
Mhm.
you these negative things. That little voice doesn't disappear because I reframed
Oh,
something one time. It's practice. It's you keep practicing it just like mindfulness. Orlando said last week that mindfulness is this lifelong practice. I think recognizing irrational thoughts is a lifelong practice. But as I practice it and I build that muscle, I get better at it. I get better at catching it in the moment, at putting up the stop sign, to use your phrase, and going, huh, could there be a different explanation right now? Or could I say something different to myself right now? And would I feel a little different about the situation if I use different language? So putting that little space between us and the event and thinking about different ways to interpret the event. So that's probably a good
and
way for us to
yeah.
wrap up.
I will say to wrap it up and end on and that note you're saying, I always describe it as exercise, right? The more you exercise the muscle, the stronger that muscle is. The gallon of milk still weighs a gallon of milk, right? But it becomes easier to pick up. So these cognitive distortions, these feelings, they don't necessarily go away, but you become stronger, more adept as you develop these skills, and it becomes easier to manage. It becomes easier to address it, adjust it, and be able to continue on with your day.
Yeah, and that's a perfect thought for us to wrap up with because we'll be practicing it this week. So we'll have some handouts and exercises posted for our students to use, and that will be our practice this week is to recognize these thoughts when they creep up, notice other stories we could tell or other language we could use. And it won't be simple, it won't be a one time, but we will be building that muscle this week and we can continue to build it through the rest of the semester. So thank you so much for joining us today, George. We appreciate your time. It's always good to see you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. And y'all have a great class with Dr. Robin. She rocks.
Bye.